Hi, it's your real estate geek, Andrew Finney here. We're back with real estate trends for August 9th, 2017. Today we're taking a look at what are buyer and seller closing costs. Let's lead in with what are buyer closing costs. Now, whenever you get into a real estate transaction, right up front, you should be meeting with your local real estate consultant and setting up that buyer consultation. During the buyer consultation, your real estate consultant will be happy to discuss what you should be expecting for a down payment amount after chatting with your local loan officer. So depending on the depending on the loan type you actually choose, whether it's VA, FHA, USDA, or conventional, will depend on the amount of the down payment that you and your mortgage officer had worked out together. So whenever you start planning for your buyer closing costs, you're actually going to be getting a loan estimate from your loan officer before you get too far along in the process, so you can have a really good idea of about how much money you need in totality between your down payment, any inspections that you're getting done while you're in the escrow process, and how much money you're going to need at the end of the day to close on your new home with your buyer closing costs. In general, it's a safe rule of thumb to consider about 3% of a sales price for a buyer closing costs. So if you're looking at a $300,000 home, multiply that $300,000 by 3% and you get $9,000 as buyer closing costs. Not to be confused with your down payment amount. So they're two separate and distinct things. So what do your buyer closing costs consist of? Well, first of all, you're going to have an appraisal fee, you're going to have a loan origination fee, you're going to have a prepaid interest, a prepaid insurance, a flood certification, if that applies to where you live right now, a tax servicing fee, a credit report fee, a bank processing fee, recording fee, notary fee, and title insurance. My goodness, those are 11 things right there about your buyer closing costs. That's a lot of stuff, right? Thank goodness that we have professionals and great local real estate agents and great local loan officers across the country that can help you with that and explain each one of those things to you if you have more questions about that. Now, a common question that both buyers and sellers alike ask: can buyer closing costs or closing costs in general be negotiated? The answer is yes. And what happens in a buyer's market, and just to be clear, this is 2017 that we're talking about right now, August 9th, 2017, and it is a seller's market at this current time. But when you're thinking about the grand scope and the historic norms for the country, and real estate goes in cycles, in a buyer's market, a buyer will have more negotiation ability in getting some of those buyer closing costs paid for, or all of them, because the supply of homes will be much higher than the demand for homes, which are qualified and buyers that are able to purchase the home. In a seller's market, you have the opposite. You have less homes available and you have a higher demand of qualified buyers wanting to get into their new home. So it's important to note that. Now, that being said, in any market, there's an opportunity to negotiate with the seller, and depending on the negotiation prowess of yourself and your real estate consultant will ultimately depend on how successful you may be in negotiating your buyer closing costs in the process of getting your new home. It's important to consider different factors whenever you're lining up and trying to get an estimate or get an idea of what kind of negotiation you're about to get into. If the home is one of those properties that are like turnkey, move-in ready, everyone's on it, you see like 11 cars out there whenever you get ready to go see it with your real estate consultant, you're headed for a bidding war, and the first thing to drop are going to be buyer closing costs. It happens every single time in a multiple bid situation. The first thing to be taken out of a buying contract, the first thing the listing agent and seller go after are dropping those buyer closing costs. The sellers already have a high amount of money to pay for their closing at the end of the day, and we'll get to that in a moment. So whenever you're looking for that negotiation, what you want to do is, if you really need your buyer closing costs paid for, and there's certainly buyers that may be able to get qualified for the loan but may not have the cash on hand for those buyer closing costs, and in some cases you can roll those buyer closing costs into a loan. So again, ask your local loan officer about that and see if that applies to you. It'll depend on a host of factors regarding your debt to income ratio, your income, and other factors that are requirements for your loan type. So you need to talk to your local loan officer to see if, number one, rolling your buyer closing cost into your loan is actually something that's good for you, and understand the impacts that may have. It may make sense, it may not make sense. That's why we're here as a real estate consultant and mortgage professional, to be able to help you make the best decision possible for you and your family. So when we're looking at the negotiation, if you saw that we were just talking about that hot property, that's going to be a difficult one to negotiate on. Now, if let's say that the average days on market for a home in your marketplace are about 30 days on market. If the average days are 30 days on market and you see a home that's been on the market for like 50 days, and they haven't done a price reduction, or even if they have done a price reduction in that time, that's probably a good candidate property, so long as you like that property, that you could probably get some favorable terms in it, because that seller's going to be thinking, I really want to sell my house and I need to figure out what I need to do as a seller now to entice a buyer to make an offer on my house and get this done. Because most people, hopefully, are always putting their home on the market because they actually need to sell their home and go somewhere, not people that just like testing the market. So, if you're a seller that just tests the market out there, don't do that. That's not cool. You're playing with people's emotions. People get excited about properties and nothing ever happens with it and it expires. That's a different story for a different video another day. Now, going back to your buyer closing costs and negotiating them, if you see that property that's been on the market for longer than what is average in your marketplace, that's a good property to start with if you need those buyer closing costs. So then a good rule of thumb, excuse me, not a good rule of thumb, but let me share this with you. Thinking aloud a little bit here, so forgive me. But if you have a home that's listed at $300,000 and you know that you have $9,000 of buyer closing costs, let me ask you something. Is it better to ask the seller, offer them $300,000 and ask them for $9,000 in closing costs, or is it better to offer them $290,000 and pay your own closing costs? It's a pretty interesting situation, right? Because you're looking at about the same amount of money either way, but now what you're talking about are terms. And here's the difference. If you ask the seller to reduce their price by $9,000 to $10,000 in this case, the $290,000, and the seller agrees, but you have to agree to pay your own buyer closing costs, you're still at the same $300,000 number, except now that money is going to actually come out of your pocket at the end of the day when you get ready to close on your new home. Now, if you, on the other hand, had offered the seller the list price and the seller had agreed to pay all of your buyer closing costs, then that money is $9,000 in real money that's going to stay in your bank account at the close of escrow. Something to consider whenever you're out there negotiating, is something to ask your local real estate professional about the best negotiation tactics in your current marketplace. So whenever we look at the selling side closing costs, we're going to take a closer look at the commission. So different commissions or listing commissions are available across the country. There is no set amount for listing commissions. Some people may say there's minimums, some people may say there's maximums. In reality, if a seller wanted to pay somebody 100% commission, or if they wanted to pay them, let's say 6 or 7% commission, they could. But there is no set amount. Now, different brokerages may have, and different agents may have their own standards of practice about what makes sense in their marketplace for the services that they provide, and they may not go below certain numbers, but that's an individual choice of that agent and that brokerage to do that. So commissions are always negotiable. That being said, a lot of sellers may pay somewhere between 6 and 7% or so for a listing commission. Well, you, the buyer, aren't paying for that. So that's one of the cool things for you as a buyer, is all that savviness of your local real estate professional, you're actually not paying for. Did you know that one? So the seller's actually paying that buyer or broker a commission based upon the sale of that property, and generally a listing agent and a buyer agent split whatever that listing commission is, and that's how we as real estate agents get paid, which again, another topic for another day. But getting back to the seller's commission, the seller's closing costs, that's where the biggest bulk of their closing costs are going to come into play. It's going to be that listing commission for the actual sale of that property. They also need to take into account any local, state, or federal programs they need to pay. A lot of people have what's called real property transfer tax, that are going to be based on a certain dollar amount per $100,000 or per $1,000. So like in Las Vegas, Nevada, it's $5.10 per $1,000. So taking, for example, that $300,000 home, a real property transfer tax for a seller in this case would look something like, let's do the math real quick, essentially about $1,500-ish. So that's something to take into consideration and know about going forward. Now, of course, if you have more questions about buying closing costs or selling closing costs when it comes to real estate, I'm happy to answer your questions wherever you are in the country. And a good starting place is always your local real estate consultant. If you need help finding one, please let me know. We do have an extensive network at my company, and I do have a good network of agents across the country. And likewise, if you have questions about seller closing costs and would like to know more about that, please let me know. I'm just happy to help you. And please, if you haven't already done so and you took something from this video and you found it helpful, please like it, share it around, because you never know who it's going to help, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I'll see you again tomorrow for Real Estate Trends for August 10th. Enjoy an amazing day.